The sun hung low and merciless over Coldwater Bend the morning Wyatt Calder rode in, 3 days behind the men who'd run off with half his herd. He wasn't looking for trouble. He definitely wasn't looking for a wife. He wanted answers, a hot meal, and to be back on the trail by nightfall. Instead, the crowd gathered outside the trading post pulled him in before he'd even tied off his horse. A debt auction. The kind, decent folks pretended not to notice, and Wyatt had never had much patience for pretending. "Last one today, gentlemen," the broker called, dragging a woman up onto the wooden crate. She wore a heavy gray shawl pulled low over her head, hiding all but a sliver of her face. Her wrists were bound with rope loose, more for show than restraint. Widows got debts to settle. Strong back, good worker. "Do I hear an offer?" Silence. "She don't talk," someone muttered near Wyatt. "Ain't right in the head, I'd wager." "Touched by grief," another said, already turning away. "Best leave her be." The broker dropped his asking price. Then dropped it again. Nobody moved. Men who'd been leaning against the rail started drifting toward the saloon instead, losing interest the way a crowd does when it's decided there's nothing worth staying for. Wyatt almost walked away, too. He had cattle to find, and no room in his life for anyone else's troubles. But something about the way she stood stopped him cold. Spine straight. Chin level. Like she was daring the whole street to look away first. He'd seen that kind of posture only once before on his sister, the day she buried her husband and refused to let anyone see her cry. This woman wasn't broken. Whatever she was, broken wasn't it. Anybody? The broker tried one more time, sweat running down his collar. $6 clears her debt, practically giving her away. "I'll take it," Wyatt said. Every head on the street turned. The broker's face lit up like he'd just unloaded a problem he'd been carrying for weeks. $6, and she's yours to deal with. Wyatt paid. Nobody argued. An old-timer near the rail shook his head at him like he'd just done something foolish, but didn't bother saying so out loud. Wyatt climbed up and cut the rope himself. She didn't thank him. She studied him instead, eyes unreadable, weighing something he wasn't part of yet. "Name's Wyatt," he said. "You don't owe me conversation. I've got a wagon headed north, back to my ranch. You're welcome to ride along, or you can walk off free right now. Your choice, not mine." She looked at the empty road behind her, then at the wagon. She chose the wagon. They hadn't gone 3 miles before Wyatt noticed the dust rising behind them. Riders 4, maybe 5, closing fast, too fast to be anything but trouble. "Friends of yours?" he asked, keeping his voice level. For the first time she spoke. Her voice was quiet but sure. "Not friends. The men who put me on that crate. They didn't want to sell me. They wanted me found." Wyatt's grip tightened on the reins. "Found by who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached under the wagon seat, pulled his spare rifle free, and checked the chamber with hands that clearly weren't new to the work. "You'll want to get behind something," she said, calm as still water. The riders boxed them in at a dry creek bed, 5 men fanning out on both sides of the wagon. Their leader lean, missing a front tooth, grinning like this was the easiest job he'd had all season, reined up first. "Hand her over, rancher, and we forget we ever crossed paths." "She's not property to hand over," Wyatt said. The man laughed. "She's worth more than your whole spread put together. Chief Whitehawk's own daughter, run off from a marriage that was already arranged. We've been paid good money to bring her back, whether she wants to go or not." Wyatt turned and looked at her, really looked, for the first time. The shawl had slipped back off her hair. Her eyes weren't the eyes of a grieving widow. They never had been. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "Would you have still bought my debt?" "Yeah," he said. "I would have." Something in her settled at that. She raised the rifle without another word and put a bullet clean through the leader's hat brim before his hand had even closed around his own gun. Chaos broke loose across the creek bed. Wyatt fired high, keeping heads down, while she worked the rifle with a precision that told its own story. Canteen split open, hat brims torn, a gunshot clean out of one rider's hand. Not one man bled. She wasn't trying to kill anyone. She was trying to end it fast. In under 2 minutes, the riders were retreating in a ragged line of dust and cursing. The leader clutching his bare head and swearing revenge that sounded a lot less confident than it had 5 minutes earlier. Wyatt lowered his rifle slowly, staring at her like he was seeing a different person than the one who'd climbed into his wagon an hour ago. "You want to tell me who you really are?" She lowered the rifle, finally letting some of the tension leave her shoulders. "My name is Sina. My father is Chief Whitehawk. 3 months ago I was promised to a man twice my age, from an allied clan, to settle a border dispute that had nothing to do with me. I refused. I ran. Those men were hired to bring me back one way or another. And the debt auction? A cover. If anyone came asking, the story was a runaway widow, not a chief's daughter. Nobody expected the men hunting me to actually find the auction first." Wyatt sat with that a moment, turning the pieces over. "So when you didn't sell that, wasn't bad luck. That was working exactly like they wanted it to. Right up until I stepped in and ruined the plan." Right up until then, she agreed, and for just a moment, something close to a smile crossed her face. "My ranch is 2 hours from here," Wyatt said. "You'll be safe there while we figure out how to get word to your father before those men do." She studied him a long moment, like she was deciding again whether to trust him. Then she nodded. They rode the rest of the way mostly in silence, the kind that isn't uncomfortable so much as it's two people getting used to each other's company. When they crested the last hill before the ranch, Wyatt pointed out the house. The barn, the pasture fence he'd built with his own hands over 6 long years. "It's not much," he said. "It's honest work," she said. "That's worth more than most things I grew up around." The days that followed settled into something neither of them expected. Sina worked the land like she'd been born to it, mending fences, tracking game, reading weather in the sky before Wyatt even noticed the clouds building. In the evenings, she taught him words from her language, and he taught her the names of every star he knew, which admittedly wasn't many, and she teased him for it more than once. She told him about her father, a leader who ruled with patience rather than fear, who'd raised a daughter instead of the son he never had, and never once treated her like a lesser version of that. She told him about the mother she'd lost young, and the promise she'd made herself afterward, never to let anyone else choose her life for her. Wyatt told her about the sister he'd buried, about building this ranch alone, because he'd never trusted himself enough to build anything with someone else, not after watching loss hollow out everyone he loved. "You're not what I expected. That first day on the crate," he admitted one night, the fire between them throwing long shadows across the yard. "Neither are you," she said. "Most men who buy a stranger's freedom expect something in return." "I don't want anything in return." "I know," she said quietly. "That's exactly why I stayed." On the 5th day, riders appeared on the ridge above the ranch, not the hired men from before, but scouts wearing the markings of Whitehawk's people, sent out searching in every direction the moment the chief learned his daughter had vanished without a trace. The scouts' shock at finding her alive and well was plain on their faces. Word was sent ahead immediately, and within 2 days, Chief Whitehawk himself arrived at the edge of Wyatt's land with a small escort, moving with the urgency of a father who hadn't slept properly in weeks. The reunion was everything Wyatt hadn't let himself hope to witness relief breaking through a hardened face. A father's arms around a daughter he'd feared he'd lost for good. When the moment passed, Whitehawk turned his attention to Wyatt, studying him with the same sharp assessment he likely gave every stranger who mattered. "My daughter tells me you paid a debt that wasn't a debt at all, fought off 5 armed men, and asked for nothing in return," the chief said. "Is that the truth of it?" "It's the truth," Wyatt said. Why? Wyatt thought about it honestly before answering. Because the chief deserved an honest answer, not a practiced one. Because nobody else in that crowd was willing to see past what they were told to see. Seemed like the least I could do was look a little closer. Whitehawk turned to his daughter. "Is this the man who refused the marriage arrangement I once considered? All those years ago? The rancher who wouldn't bow to a border deal?" Sina's eyebrows lifted in surprise clearly. This was a piece of the story she hadn't known. Wyatt looked equally caught off guard. "That was you?" Wyatt asked slowly, memory catching up. Years back, before he'd built this ranch alone, his own family had been offered into a similar arrangement, a marriage meant to smooth over old tensions between settlers and Whitehawk's people. Wyatt had refused it outright, not out of disrespect, but because he didn't believe any life should be traded like livestock. He hadn't thought of it in years. Whitehawk allowed himself a rare, small smile. "I remember the young man who turned down my offer and gave his reasons plainly instead of hiding behind excuses. I respected it, even then. It seems some things come back around." He looked between Wyatt and his daughter the easy way they stood near each other, the trust that had clearly built itself over 5 short days, into something neither of them was naming out loud yet. "I won't repeat the mistake of choosing for her again," Whitehawk said. "That right belongs to her, and to whoever earns it honestly." Sina stepped forward. "Father, I don't need you to decide anything for me, but I also don't need to hide what I already know." She turned to Wyatt. "I'm not going back to a life someone else designed for me," she said, "but I'm not opposed to staying, if the man standing in front of me is willing to build something neither of our worlds, handed us something we choose ourselves." Wyatt didn't hesitate, not the way he might have 5 days earlier, before a debt auction changed the shape of his entire life. "I'd like that," he said, "only if it's what you actually want. Not tradition, not obligation, just what you want." "It is," Sina said simply. Whitehawk watched the exchange with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd learned, over many years, that the strongest bonds were the ones nobody had to force. "Then let it be known," the chief said, loud enough for his escort and the ranch hands gathering nearby to hear, "that my daughter chooses her own path, and I stand behind that choice fully." What followed wasn't the wedding of gold and grand ceremony that either of their worlds might have expected. It was smaller, simpler, built from the same honesty that had brought them together in the first place. Whitehawk's people and Wyatt's neighbors shared a meal under the open sky, an unlikely mix of settlers and tribe members finding common ground over a fire, much the way Wyatt and Sina had, one conversation at a time. Months later, the ranch looked different than it had the day Wyatt rode home with a silent stranger in his wagon. There were new fences, a second set of hands working the herd, laughter carrying across the yard in 2 languages instead of 1. Wyatt often thought back to that auction crate, how close he'd come to walking past it entirely, how easily the whole crowd had looked at a woman standing tall in the face of humiliation, and decided there was nothing worth seeing. He was glad, every single day, that he'd looked twice.